I'm just kidding.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hello. Hello, and welcome to the Park Theater at the Epps Auditorium. Here's some important information before we begin this afternoon's program. First, we ask you to take a moment to please silence your cell phones completely. In the case of emergency, listen to our staff for instructions and exit through the large main doors. Then exit through the River Street doors along the hallway. If you are seated in the upper seats, you can exit on the main stairwell from the second floor lobby or exit through the landing doors next to the alley. that lead to the alley. You may also receive emergency instructions over the PA system by the fire department. Please take your drinks, old wrappers, and containers with you and deposit them into our trash and recycle bins throughout the theater. And finally, if you are not on our email list, please look for the sign-up sheet in the lobby. Thank you very much, everyone, and please enjoy this afternoon's program celebrating Martin Luther King Jr.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Jeffrey Fringe Celebration, the 9th annual in this community and area. My name is Owen Houghton. I'm a member of the local committee. I've just come from ringing the Paul Revere bell up the street at the United Church with several of our Rotary interactors. And the bell, which hopefully some of you heard, welcomes you into this celebration. Like the 37th National Bell rang in Philadelphia this morning as part of a national Let Freedom Ring, Choose Nonviolent Violence, which began, as I say, this noon. Which is all intended to honor Dr. Martin Luther King on his birthday. After 8 years as moderator of this Jeffrey Fringe celebration, I am pleased today to introduce to you your new moderator, Interact President, Senior Class President, Ellie Wyman.
Hi everyone, my name is Ella Wyman. Thank you, Owen, for the introduction. Firstly, I'd like to thank you all for coming today, whether you are here in the theater or watching on the live stream. This is our first in-person event since COVID began, so I'm so happy to be here with you all, celebrating Martin Luther King and remembering all that he stood for. Our theme this year is Justice Everywhere, which stems from the famous Martin Luther King quote, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." We have a wonderful program today. Mark Koyama will start us off with an invocation, followed by Andrea Rivera, who will be reading one of Martin Luther King's sermons and providing her own commentary. I hope you all enjoy and are able to reflect during today's ceremony the tremendous importance of celebrating Martin Luther King and all the ways he contributed to our goal of justice everywhere. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Reverend Mark Koyama, the pastor of the United Church of Jackery, who will be presenting the invocation.
Good evening. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was the greatest prophet of our time. It is extraordinarily important that we continue to move his legacy from generation to generation. He was a man who called upon us to look intentionally to our moral life, and that is what we will do this evening here. Let us pray. We gather together this evening in the name of all that is holy to form a community of remembrance, a beloved community of remembrance, to honor the memory of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a man whose extraordinary wisdom, strategic skill, and rhetorical prowess and profound love and trust in God inspired a nation and led us through a period of deep but necessary pain as we transformed to more perfectly embody the promise of our nation, to be the home of men and women created by God in love, to share in equal part the dignity that love bestows. We gather this evening in the name of all that is holy to form a community of hope, a beloved community of hope, and in this way to honor the memory of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who died in the name of this hope. The simple hope that children of every ethnicity, every color, race, every gender will play together and learn together and work together. In his famous speech at the Lincoln Memorial, Dr. King spoke directly to us, to you and me. He said, "Let the bells of freedom ring from the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire. Our children raise their voices in song. We ring those bells, for with their song they teach us once again the greatest promise of freedom. The promise to be the person that each of us is, when each of us enjoys the dignity to seek our own flourishing, regardless of how we were born, who we have become." And then the bells of freedom from the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire ring. We look back this evening remembering Dr. King. We look forward this evening embodying the dream of Dr. King. And we thank you, Holy One, for the strength and the purpose, no matter how hard the challenges that lie ahead, to stride ever toward freedom. In the name of all that is holy, amen.
Hello, everyone. My name is Andrea, and I'm going to be doing commentary on Martin Luther King's 1967 Christmas sermon. I first want to thank you guys all for joining us today as we commemorate the lasting effect that the work of Martin Luther King Jr. had on our society. So the sermon excerpt goes as follows. It really boils down to this, that all life is interrelated. We are all caught up in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied into a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Did you ever stop to think that you can't even leave for your job in the morning without being dependent on most of the world? This is the way our universe is structured. This is the interrelated quality. We aren't going to have peace on earth until we can recognize this basic fact of interrelated structure of all of reality. The main idea of this passage is to emphasize equality and interconnectedness. Every single thing we do impacts others, even when we don't realize it. Small actions tend to have big consequences. To tie this to today's theme, social justice could not be achieved without environmental justice, including healthier living environments for underprivileged communities and universal access to clean air, water, and soil, meaning that what we do as a society is interconnected with our planet. Another way that the environment ties into Dr. King's efforts for social justice and interconnectedness is by tackling the concept of environmental racism. Environmental racism takes place on a systemic level and occurs with or without the conscious efforts of governmental bodies. Wealthier, primarily white neighborhoods at the time did not want their homes next to hazardous waste facilities, and they had the money and political power to protect their own interests. These advantages were not as available to communities of color, meaning that they were often forced to take properties on landfills, industrial complexes, and other environmentally dangerous sites. This lowered property value and endangered human life. Dr. King marched and protested so that blatant inequalities like this would be a thing of the past. To wrap things up and tie this all together, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. stood for the total equality of all races, classes, and nations. He believed that the government had a duty to protect its people from oppression and enforce laws preventing the exploitation of vulnerable peoples. As he said, all life is interrelated. So it follows that the well-being of humans is deeply tied to the interconnectedness of healthy ecosystems. This includes abundant wildlife, healthy lands, clean water and air, and safe environment for both humans and wildlife to thrive. Since wildlife can't speak for itself, it falls on the rest of us to provide a voice for those vulnerable creatures. In the words of former Attorney General Eric Holder, Dr. King helped plant the seeds for what would become our nation's now thriving environmental justice movement. Dr. King's actions not only led to the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, but these came hand in hand with the Clean Air Act in 1963, the Clean Water Act of 1972, and the Endangered Species Act of 1973. Today, we should all remember to not only be kind to one another, but also be kind to our planet and protect our planet, because we are one human race sharing this same home. Thank you. And now we will have a performance by Jaffrey Grade School and Range Memorial School students. All right. We have one more round of applause for those amazing singers. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's keynote speaker. As former president of the Sierra Club, this individual has been fighting for environmental justice for decades. He also served as a board member and lectured at the W. Haywood Burns Environmental Education Center in the Albany Capital Region of New York. He has done such notable work throughout his life, and it is an honor to have him here with us today. Everyone, please welcome Aaron Mayer.
Good evening. Good evening. I know I'm in New Hampshire, and I know that the New England greeting is yeah. But really, in all seriousness, it is indeed an honor and a privilege to be here. And these young voices, they are an inspiration. Could you please again give them a hand? It's so appropriate given the heavy topic of the day and the memory of the day and looking at the life of Dr. King, and not realize that, or many of you might have forget, or maybe you were younger, but those of us who are in our mid-60s and older know of Birmingham, where kids from second grade through high school left school to join in a boycott for, again, equal rights. Not black rights, but equal rights and equal protection under the law. And what was powerful about that day that really brought the civil rights struggle into the home of every family in America and in the hills of here of New Hampshire was to see children being hosed in the streets of Birmingham, Alabama. Again, second graders, just like this, moving the needle for justice and inspiration, being hosed. They were part of that fight. It's an intergenerational fight. And as they say about history, the past isn't always past. We're still struggling. We're still fighting over some of the same questions. A little bit about me. I am Aaron Mayer, and next slide. I am, as I mentioned, the 57th president of the Sierra Club. That, like U.S. presidents, they number them. It's founded by a fellow by the name of John Muir. I currently serve as the Forever Adirondacks Wilderness Campaign Director for the Adirondack Council in the state of New York, working at the intersection of climate, environment, climate justice, history, legacy, and connection. And the reason why in this phase of my fight for justice and fight for the planet is that we right now have 5 years to act on climate. And why the environment, as opposed to fighting in the communities where I founded and was a pioneer in the environmental justice movement, is because right now the most significant asset to save the planet, to save the planet, is our wilderness. And our wilderness from Maine through the northern parts of Pennsylvania is probably the most significant wilderness that we can protect. This is something that you cannot build. As the pastor mentioned, God's gift, our stewardship is that we have creation, and the creation of woods. These woods are the lungs, especially the Adirondacks, the nation's largest wilderness area. In fact, you can stick the whole state of Vermont in the Adirondacks. Think about that. And so protecting them right now is the most significant thing one can do. Next slide. To fight for and protect the planet and protect the environment. So one of my jobs and roles is trying to build that awareness. It's not that we're going to have enough solar panels, wind farms, or hydroelectric, or geothermal. We're not going to build our way out of the climate crisis. But what we can do and what we should be doing is preserving those natural ecosystems that are already God-given and in our backyard. The pastor probably talks about the book of Genesis and how mankind, our role in that old book, that first book, was to be stewards of creation. We are not here to exploit creation to exhaustion or, as was mentioned earlier, the inescapable mutuality of all things being connected. We do so at our peril. And for you young guys, I'm like the Lorax, right? Right? Because once we cut down all the trees and all the things that depend upon the trees, how are they going to survive? It is all connected. It is all connected. So think of me not only in my fight for environmental justice and climate justice, not only for humanity, all of humanity, but protected, but also for all creation, for all the critters, for all the things, for all the mosses. All of that is necessary to produce clean air and clean water. You go to a swamp or a bog or a wetland, it's kind of stinky and icky. But it's one of those natural creations and wonders that we cannot manufacture or replicate, because it takes in all the toxins that we discharge into the ecosystem as well as other dirt, and it cleans them out. And from that, we get clean water. How many of you know that we're drinking the same water that the dinosaurs had back in the day, right? Wow, that's how powerful this ecosystem and this cycles matter. And so when we deplete them and destroy them, they can no longer, to the point where they can no longer repair themselves, just like in the Lorax. We do so at our peril. Now, the Lorax, it closed on hope, and it closed on the fact that, you got one seed. Right now, humanity is down to that one seed. Next slide, please. That's my daughter, my youngest daughter, Olivia, and she's out there with her friends. And I take her and lots of young folks as well as lots of old folks. And this is one of the old growth areas in the forest in the Adirondacks, to show and talk about the web of life and how all things are connected and our role in saving the planet. Next slide. And as mentioned earlier, and I mean, we did not coordinate this, am I correct? We did not talk before this. Okay? I'm going to say it's Sierra Club, Martin Luther King, the parallel syllogism of the words of Dr. King and the inescapable mutuality of all creation, how all things are connected. We cannot pull at the thread of one thing and not impact something else. This is not only for the human condition, but it's for all creation and ecosystems. It's a very powerful construct, but guess what? John Muir also, again, talk about parallel syllogism or great minds thinking alike, that universal truth that you cannot pull at one thing in the universe and find out that it's not hitched to something else. And one of the powerful things about John Muir, what makes him a hero of mine in the environmental movement, he did something called a 1,000-mile walk. He was a resistor against the Civil War, so he didn't, he went to Canada. But when he came back, he went on a 1,000-mile walk in 1867, a few years after the Civil War. The South was still smoking. And he saw the industrialized destruction that humanity inflicted upon humanity and the environment. And he became really withdrawn. And one of the things that he became was our first major national Lorax, and advocating for creation. And while interestingly, when he did that 1,000-mile walk, that many people read, but they don't, when you have a civil rights and human rights background, you start to pay attention to also to other details. Like he had Thoreau's works in his pocket. He had the works of an abolitionist who preached nonviolence and resistance and preached against the war, but also against the immorality of slavery. So here's a man in that walk, and he's bearing witness the extent that humankind went to keep other human beings in bondage, and he was deeply affected by that. So he kind of turned inwardly and really preached only for protecting the environment. Without man, he became kind of angry. But over time, he evolved. He realized mankind as a change agent. And he became the pioneer who then enlisted Teddy Roosevelt to come out to Yosemite to see the power of the Yosemite Mountains and compare that to the Adirondacks. And he leaned in on Teddy to start to save those last patches of green at the first wave of the Industrial Revolution when we were cutting down just everything. Not long ago, the forests around here, the forests and the lands up in the Adirondacks were denuded. The mountains were all denuded. And from Muir's work through Teddy Roosevelt, he got, enshrined into law, as I say, the first institutions, National Park Service, protecting national parks, protecting wilderness. He got those things enshrined and codified into law. But he also was part of something else called the Sequoia League. Because a lot of folks, there's a lot of controversy to this day around John Muir. Some get it wrong. Some get it wrong. In fact, I just wrote a recent article with Dr. Chad Hansen on John Muir and what he got right. And that he was a force of change, but not only protecting ecosystems, but also protecting people. One of the things he got right is the founder of the Sequoia League, which was protection of indigenous people who were being displaced from their lands out west as white America was moving across this country, displacing Native Americans and mistreating them. And so he founded and funded one of the early protective organizations for Native Americans. Now, often people hear the Sierra Club, they say, well, wait a minute, isn't the Sierra Club, wasn't it against Native Americans, was it? Well, there was definitely some bigoted pieces in the past, something that I will in later in my talk about how we still fought against some of those broader national tendencies. Again, history repeats itself. Not exactly the same. Sometimes it rhymes, sometimes it does weird things, but in protecting creation and protecting humanity, we can always see that there's important pieces that are all interconnected. Next slide, please. So my connection and carrying forward my activism in the human rights and civil rights and environmental rights is because of the current crisis. And so make no mistake about it.
If Dr. King was alive at this moment, he would be preaching for all humanity and all creation. He would be right now really thundering hard on that book of Genesis and our duty to save the planet and save humanity from our effects of burning fossil fuels. And right now, there are two big carbon sinks. One are the oceans, and the other is the land and the trees. The oceans, while it's absorbing carbon, it's also absorbing a lot of heat. And when that heat is absorbed in the oceans get warmer, and then it's more moisture. So things get wetter. So what happens is we're going to get more snow and a lot more wet stuff. But also, it also destabilizes the planet. Next slide, please. And so when the oceans get warmer, so basically for most of my life and right up to my older daughter's life, who are in their 30s, okay, we had something called a stable polar vortex. This is big science, guys. You got to get this in high school and middle school, okay? So for thousands of years, that polar vortex has been stable. But with global warming, when they talk about climate change, not the weather, but the whole weather systems and polar vortex which shape our climate, we start to see warm air being sucked up as it becomes destabilized as the earth gets hotter. It's no longer going in a circle, it's doing this wobbly thing. So heat gets pulled up into the Arctic, more moisture from the oceans because it's heated up, gets pulled in the atmosphere. And we have what we call atmospheric storms or weather that ends up, killing you. Next slide. And injuring a lot of people. We are right now facing the fourth warmest winter and summer on record. Okay, places that should be cold right now, okay, would be alarming because they're now hot. Next slide. And so what ends up happening is we are losing our Arctic and those ecosystems, but more importantly, frontline indigenous communities in the Arctic that used to rely on the seasons, whole cultures, whole ways of life that relied and were connected to the seasons. They would be able to go out on the frozen ice and fish and hunt. Now, yes, the ice may be expanding cyclically, but it's the freshwater melt that will freeze faster, but the ice is thinner. So the indigenous people who could go out and fish can no longer go out on the ice because it's too thin. So it may look like from space you got more ice, but it's just the fact that fresh water sitting on top of salt water will freeze faster. And as a consequence, we're going to be within the next few years, before many of you are in high school, you may see a North Pole with no ice. Man, not absolute. But the point of the matter is the trend is there. But equally more important, this is the first season, the winter season. Think about it, domestically within the United States. One of the reasons why Dr. King went out and fought for civil rights and human rights is to protect people's lives. Well, because of climate change, over 100 Americans lost their lives. Whether it was from the storms and the freezing in Buffalo, all the way out to California where people are drowning because of the atmospheric rivers and storms because of the destabilized polar vortex. But that is not the only thing that's happening. Also in this January, the very old evil that underscores the denial because there are politics, as I say, that relies on creating division so that we cannot work on the planet and we cannot work on climate is also happening. Next slide. So one of the things I had to deal with in Lake Placid, New York, was a family, children your age, being run out of school because of their race. And so while we're also fighting about the planet and saving the Adirondacks, within the very Adirondacks, the old issues of civil rights, race, and place are still happening. They're having a conversation on something called replacement theory. It's nonsense. Dr. King fought for human rights, civil rights, not black rights, or Hispanic and indigenous rights over white rights. But he fought for justice, which is equal protection under the law. And what civil rights are, all of us, for citizens, a minimum standard and a code of conduct that protects us, not on the basis of the color of our skin, but on the content of our character. So yes, second graders are being chased from their community because of the color of their skin. This is this year. Next slide. Why? How's it all connected? As I mentioned, it all comes down to the battle of land. And there are forces of folks who, as they say, they make their profits off the division of society. But here's the thing about the environment. Like in the Sneetches for Dr. Seuss, if you watch the Sneetches with the stars in their belly, okay, of those who think they're better, the fact of the matter is that nobody is better than anybody else. But equally more important is those differences that people exploit so that one segment of society can continue to benefit at the expense of the majority. Dr. King saw that. He formed a poor people's movement. So you're looking at this wonderful slide here. And what has this got to do with King and the environment and the talk? Well, one of the co-founders of the Sierra Club was Joe LeConte. He was a minister. He was a brilliant geologist, but he was kind of a crazy guy. He posited a theory that up until the mid, as I say, pretty much after the 60s, naturalist history, the eugenics movement was one of his brainchilds, because up through the Civil War, and people like Dr. King, if they believed in Adam and Eve, there was one origin of humanity, of this, as I say, which all humanity evolved. So there's one man and one woman from which all descended. But this guy came up with a theory, because that worked, and they say the religious folks with the abolitionist movement in the United States, they were building on that unity of humankind. And the abolitionist movement, as they say, they won that Civil War, but this war was still before them, fought over laws and values. Joe LeConte was a captain in the Confederate Army. Again, context matters, okay? And he held on to his beliefs even though he lost the war. But he came up with a new theory of polygeneity. So in other words, we didn't come from Adam and Eve. We came from just different species, like there were different animals, and using the words of Darwin, there's not one common. We descend from different lines. And so what he was suggesting with that, there were superior and inferior human beings. And so he came up with a unified theory in which his environmental and his use of the Sierra Club in its early days was to promote Darwinian natural selection and eugenics. And this was a very powerful movement in the United States. It was classroom and book teaching, okay? And so they were taught that varying races that were outside of Anglo-Saxon whites. Let me be clear, outside of Anglo-Saxon whites were degrees of inferiority. And what's you're missing, I think you might even have the Irishmen up there, because at that point in time, there was no difference in their racism against the Irish and the white. They actually believed that they were also another inferior breed in class and caste. And they used, and this is coming from one of their journals, okay, and he was a disciple of Louis Agassiz, a Harvard professor at that time, who did a lot of his breakthrough genius studies in the Helderberg Mountains, or in the Helderberg Escarpment, where I live at right now. In fact, Joe LeConte did some graduate work over the Helderberg Escarpment. But the point of the matter is that the theory of who should control the land and who should be superior within the land, you know, this grand theory was marshaled by this gentleman. And land use policy and policies as they say, of human rights, he felt needed to be anchored in this eugenics natural selection. So what happened as a result of those politicians and educators who believed this theory? Well, they promulgated laws, they promulgated rules, and this was the scientific underpinning of separate and unequal. This was the scientific foundation. So you're moving from religion now using science to foster racism, but also foster who should be, as they say, have good jobs, good education, who should be living on the land, who should control that. And in this case, this is the founding of the major environmental movement, the Sierra Club. So even early on, you can see how race is always tied to these things, but it's been a very powerful divider. Why does this matter? Why does this thing to me? Why does it speak to me this aspect of the Sierra Club, because I had to dig into the Sierra Club. Why? Next slide. Next slide. Because I am descendant of slaves who were impacted by this. Now, I have all my life enjoyed the wilderness and outdoor. In fact, that is our ancestral land in the Blue Ridge Mountains of South Carolina. That's still in our family lands since my ancestors, Zion McKenzie, this is my uncle Isaac Cowley, okay, who were both slaves, were on that land. That land is still in our family. And it's really kind of a miracle because why? Things that people engaged in can chase us off that land. We had to survive that. Next slide. Okay? And then we talk about the impacts of the beliefs of Attila Khan and how people, as I say, control and own people. That's my ancestral grandmother. She was worth $600 in that book. Now, this is important for you kids because you got to learn about what was Dr. King fighting over. What was the Civil War about? You know, it was fighting so that one class of humans could actually own another class. It was really like the sneetches of Dr. Seuss, but really, really bad. And it with the Lorax of cutting down everything and destroying things. Next slide. Now, some of you have a treat here. I mean, some of my elders, your grandparents, your moms and dads that are here, you've probably heard about a poll tax. You know, you've heard it talked about. But you don't realize how significant it was in polarizing and creating a society of inequality that we had. A poll tax served two purposes. In order for a free person of color to vote, they had to pay that tax. Had to. If you didn't pay that tax, you were delinquent on your tax, and you could lose not only your right to vote, but you could also lose your land. Many African Americans who were freed after the Civil War, who actually earned wages and were cash rich, had income. The poll tax was a way to legally steal the right rules, the right laws. This is what we talk about. Yeah, it was the law, but it was an unjust law. It was a law of extraction against one race to A, deny them the right to vote, deny them that liberty, and B, as a penalty if they didn't pay it, okay, they would also lose their land. Their land was held, and as I say, as used to pay that tax. So they seized that land. And as a result, by the way, you can't see it here, but the poll tax for my ancestor in 1883, this poll tax was $1,000 in 1883 dollars, okay? So that's equivalent to you paying a little over $10,000. Now I think if you adjust, it might be a little bit higher, just to give you an idea of a sense of scale. All right? Most people didn't have the cash. There's a lot of people owned the land and they were struggling, but they did not have a lot of that cash. And so many of them basically lost their land. And then they were vagrants. This is where the role of police enforcing, you probably heard about the chain gangs, and you probably heard about the Black Lives Matter anchoring it to slavery. But this was the thing that created what they call vagrancy in the South. And this was one of the big push factors of a lot of the Southern migration to the North. So under vagrancy laws, you could be arrested, and then guess what? Chain gangs and put back on plantations or state public work projects, basically re-enslaved using just tax law, tax code. It had a double impact, and this was designed. This is the extent that these folks planned this. So when Dr. King came along, he basically pushed back against the worsening effects of this. This has been around for a very, very, very long time. Next slide. And yes, those laws going back then to now decide who and how people live within the land. And current politics still plays with these same games. And it's not just because of race, it's because of a public and the people that work together will always pursue justice. Nobody likes injustice. Remember, when those kids were hosed, one of the things that they fought against was, as I say, equal protection under the law. So land use and land use policies and where people are assigned and where they live, race and income matter. Okay? So what happens is that your color and the amount of money in your pocket can drive where you live, but then there's like a lot of rules and decisions of where the park's gonna be, who's gonna have the golf course, and who's gonna have the sewage treatment plant. And these injustices, these form of civil rights violations that are not like the old days, which to me is still the young days in America, but still it's a modern way of society resegregating itself just by land use and other features of our civil society. And this is what the politicians play on. I know the little guys, it's mainly for big folks. They play on this. This is what the messaging campaign's about. This is when you start arguing about woke and start arguing about, all these other things. And so they find your fears and your points and your manipulations so you can get acute action to create disproportionate outcomes. Next slide. And that's what happened to my community. This is what brought me in to the environmental movement over 35 years ago. And they decided a solid waste incinerator in my community. And when my daughters were younger than some of you down front, they ended up with something called environmental asthma. So this community is the Black community in Arbor Hill in Albany, New York, the capital of the state of New York. This plant was the generator that produced energy. It was called state-of-the-art environmental energy insofar as burning garbage or solid waste, because they're saying they're saving waste and going to the landfill. By burning it and making energy, it's cheaper for the taxpayers. But the thing is, they sited the incinerator in the Black community, in the center of the Black community. And the prevailing winds carried the smoke over the entire community. Our governor's office, the state office complex, that's where they got their power. And so my community, my children, they're like their age, were poisoned. My older daughters ended up with something called environmental asthma. This is very common. A study in 1987 about when I got involved against this incinerator called Toxic Waste and Race. And what it found was that frontline communities and communities of color around the country were more likely than not, or if you're poor, this is where poor whites come in, were more likely than not the citing of negative amenities and environmental risks that destroy people's health, well-being, and more importantly, injured their children. And sometimes the damage is permanent and intergenerational. And why I became a father who had to fight, not because of the injustice, but because of now the impact on my family. When you hurt my babies, I had to do what I had to do to step up. And so as a professional, next slide, working for the state of New York, I'm a retired epidemiologist. So I'm a guy that goes out and maps diseases and disease outbreaks. So I had to use my science and skill to organize the community. Even the little folks, everybody had a hand in that revolution. And we picketed using our civil society, using the rules of Thoreau and Dr. Martin Luther King. We engaged in nonviolent civil disobedience. And guess what? We won and we shut that incinerator that was hurting a lot of children and adults down. You as youth, even you guys, this is all like the kids in Alabama, rising up, working with your parents. You can make change. There's always hope. And this is what Dr. King was about, was not settling on injustice, but fighting for justice. Now this was special for me because I had to fight against my boss. My boss was the governor of the state of New York. And I had to fight against my other boss, the commissioner of the health department. And guess what? I took them all to court and I won. Okay? It's meaning no fear. Just because you gotta work for a living, sometimes some things are more important than a wage. Some people feel that you will sell your democracy, sell your soul, sell your family for a wage. But Dr. King gave his life at a sanitation worker strike in Memphis. A labor action and an environmental action. He gave his life because the dignity of humanity was worth it and the cause of justice was worth it. Now, I didn't have to give my life, but yes, I'm willing to put my job on the line for the sake of the community, our beloved community. So, yeah, this is kind of heavy. Like, hey, little guys, this is some weird stuff. The guys in the LORAC, this is where the guys in the LORAC are doing some bad stuff. The tree choppers, the burning up stuff. And some of the Sneech guys, they're doing some bad stuff. And this is about using all things to bring about significant change. And when you bring about change, you bring about people together. This was not blacks just fighting, this was blacks and whites coming together. Next slide. And so my biggest allies were my brothers in love and protection of the environment, and protection of humanity, and protection of justice. When we fight together for justice, we bring about change. And I became a member of the Sierra Club. And I also became a member because I also wanted to change the culture that Joe LeConte and the legacy he had left in the Sierra Club. So I brought the environmental justice movement to the Sierra Club and transformed that culture. And from that culture of transformation, next slide, we also then took it to the clean revolutions. They're talking about fighting climate change. But they talk about building clean cars. But they want to build clean cars on a plant that was a former plantation over in Mississippi, in Jackson, Mississippi, the Nissan Leaf plant. So they want to build clean cars to save the planet with dirty labor practices, dirty labor and racist practices, separate and unequal. So I went there at the call and request of the workers and saying, listen, we're trying to save the planet, produce clean technology in cars, but they want to, as I say, what they call make big capitals, like the industrialists, like Cap Pyramid in the industrial period that I had LeConte again, divide, conquer, playing poor whites off against poor blacks, rather than paying them a living wage for the new clean energy economy. So we linked up from the environmental standpoint that if you're saving the planet, you must engage in labor practices that are just. Next slide. So I worked with my brother Bill McKibben and countless others. I've gone to jail fighting for decent human conditions, while at the same time, again, we cannot have dirty practices trying to save the planet. We must engage in just relationships to build, as I say, a just and civil society. And so, yeah, fighting for environmental rights, fighting for environmental justice, it is still one of those acts that Dr. King, if he was here, wouldn't be just only me, Dr. King would be right there with me. And going to jail because our rights still matter. And Dr. King's call for us to action still matters. Next slide. So, next slide. Thank you. And where I get my struggle from, my father was a UAW, United Auto Workers, GM World War II vet, and he was a union labor organizer. And his values, the first thing he said, son, I want you not to be here. I want you to get a white-collar job. I want you to go to college. His sweat equity, his liberty, his sacrifice advanced me to that next generation level. Again, like Dr. King, talking about labor rights. Again, he died. He's staying with UAW leaders, but he died defending labor rights. And in a community that was one of the most toxic, and still is one of the most toxic today in Memphis, Tennessee. Next slide. And so, yes, I've taken the fight around the world. I've taken the fight before the UN at various climate summits, saying that, yes, we can save the planet. I'm going to be the LORAX. But we must also save the dignity of humanity as well. It's not an either or. It's a new economy. But some folks want to trick us into saying, well, it's got to be profitable. No, you can be profitable, but you must be just. Next slide. So when we talk about frontline communities and environmental racism and environmental injustice, how does that play out in the world of climate change around the world? Well, it's no longer just in the United States. Whole nations, are frontline communities. Well, the Bikini Atoll was used to test atomic weapons for the U.S. and its development of its atomic arsenal. But that same Bikini Atoll where people still live, indigenous people there, are now suffering from sea level rise. So they were the victims in the experimentation of the creation of nuclear weapons, for our current war arsenal, and now they are the frontline victims. Those who contributed the least to climate change are suffering the worst effects. And this is America. This is something that we in public policy can change and engage. Now, again, it's cheaper to look the other way. But like Dr. King, we cannot. Next slide, please. So I've worked with indigenous leaders, working class leaders, union leaders from all around the country so that we can, as I say, create a message, a unity message, whereby, we come together to bring about collective action and change that centers on our humanity as we center them on trying to protect and save the planet. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Okay. Next slide. Skipping over that. What's important is that we come together. That we come together like Dr. King had instructed us. That our ancestors, our elders have instructed us. It's not the color of our skin, it's the content of our character. Again, the environment does not know your race, color, or your pocketbook. The environment's going to sing last. The planet and climate is going to sing last. The issue is how do we come together, still in the spirit of Dr. King, still on this day of service. It's not a day off. It's a day of deep thinking. No longer are we just saving ourselves and saving the weaknesses in our democracy, but we must patch over these differences in our democracy and come together so that this generation doesn't have the hard fight that they're really going to have in their lifetime. They're going to face a very tough fight. But we can do something right now to not make it as tough. Next slide. So coming out in the resistance at Phil, we're down there when they had the Hurricane Katrina. And right now, all the storms in the south and the freezing in the south. Being on the front line like Dr. King, in solidarity, because climate affects us everywhere. There's no safe place. They talk about Goldilocks zones. Do you know where the Goldilocks zone right now? A lot of people know. It's the Northeast. It's right here. And we talk about climate refugees and migration. Wait until the wealthy people start buying up all the land in the Northeast and displacing all of you because they recognize you may not have the income power. At least a few of them, a few of you may have. You might have a good 401k, but I tell you, you think of the price of a dozen eggs that's going through the roof. You just don't know because the serious effects of human migration, which we're already seeing at the south of the border. Okay, what you're seeing at the south of the border is not that people are trying to run in and they're illegal. And that's, again, playing with the language of the law and legality and against justice and not acknowledging why people are migrating. And by the way, if you pay attention to patents and innovation, it has actually been immigrants that have been driving our technology economy. Some of the biggest patents in technology that we enjoy to this day are from Latin America, the Caribbean, and Asia, and Southeast Asia. But yet, we try to frame it in terms of people trying to come in and distracting us from the work that we need to do to repair our democracy, build up for one another, and saving the planet by acting on climate. Next slide. So I've gone out with a bunch of news steps. I'm not going to bore folks with that, but I've been giving people fossils of the day. People who want to anchor themselves in the dinosaur values of yesterday and discriminating, and while using discrimination to cover for their politics that basically allow nothing to be done on the planet. But my job is saying we need to come together. And like today, the kids had a day off, but all these kids, like the kids in Selma, Montgomery, Alabama, second graders on up, they showed up here today to lend their little voices of us. That song, it really reached my heart. It touched my heart because you were like my generation when I was your age. And to see you still singing that song really, really makes a difference. Next slide. So I talk, and again, it's going to be that multi-ethnic youth coming together because right now we're fighting for their future. And we're making a switch. Your children will be on that line next. Because things in climate and the things in the planet, things in the U.S. are going to get tougher. But we can make a difference. This is that part in the Lorax. The answer, but you that one seed, we're at that point in time, and you all are the hope. You're going to be the next generation of scientists, leaders, and thinkers. But you're going to be those who will be singing the song for justice and inclusion so that we can come together to heal and save the planet. And that's why the hope that I see in your song is important. Next slide. Next slide. So I talked a little bit earlier about my daughters being injured and how they were damaged by the incinerator. They ended up, you wonder what would happen to a kid that's impacted. They became engineers. And they went to one of the best engineering schools in this country, West Point. 2 of them were West Point graduates. And their leadership essay was on their battle against polychlorinated biphenyls in the Hudson River. In fact, probably one of the few environmentalist leaders that went into West Point, not talking about blowing something up or shooting something or getting a merit badge, but actually engaging in civil action to save the planet and seeking the best solutions to save the planet. The oldest one is my oldest daughter, MJ. She's going to probably be a colonel by the end of this year. That's her. She's the first female commander of an infantry regiment in the United States. 3 tours of combat and a Bronze Star recipient. Her leadership is core in civil rights, human rights, and environmental justice. She was their age when she was in the field, and now she's a leader right now. And that science background is driving that conversation in the Pentagon on what we need to do to save humanity, because they're dealing with the threats that we're going to face as the global climate destabilizes even more, and when the population movements are going to be in the 500 million number. So this is where they're working right now, but they're doing it with dignity and justice. I want to thank you all for lending your ear and lending your heart, and I want to thank all you guys for being little Loraxes and lending your song. Thank you. Can I do something?
I got to do this because I always tease my daughters about what I'm up to. And they always know that it's a bunch of you old fuddy-duddies in the audience. But this is just so beautiful right here. When I got this intergenerational love. Can I look a fist for the planet? Are we going to fight for the planet? Are we going to fight for the planet? Are we going to fight for the planet?
All right, can we have another huge round of applause for that amazing keynote speech? All right, next up is our second musical performance by the combined grade school chorus. So give it up for them.
the wonders of technology, right? I had to do the magic here.
Well, I'm in a very good mood now. That was wonderful. Nice job, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. It's really nice to see the community come together, families, new faces, students, children. It's all wonderful. So thank you all for joining us. I have a few things I get to talk about tonight briefly.
One of them is the Millipore Sigma MLK Student Service Scholarship, and I'll get to that in just a moment. But I just really want to encourage families to take a moment after the event to check out our reception. There are some beautiful projects from our 6th grade students at Jaffrey Ridge Middle School that were developed and created with the leadership of teachers Shauna Smith and Erica Jordan. And they're really, really phenomenal. And it just shows what creativity and thinkers we have in this community in our young people. So really, please check that out. I'm very excited to announce that tonight, the Millipore Sigma MLK Student Service Scholarship will be returning this spring for a 2nd year in a row. We were able to partner with Millipore Sigma last year to create the Millipore Sigma MLK Student Service Scholarship Awards, and we were able to pick from a pool of candidates of Jaffrey and Ridge graduating seniors who had demonstrated a passion and dedication to service our community. We were able to pick 2 students that were going on to further education and technical training and award those scholarships at the Conant High School Awards Night last May. Those students last year were Allison Hochter and Heather Gagne. We were really pleased to be able to award those scholarships to 2 very deserving students. This spring we'll be doing the same. The awards will be given at Conant High School awards ceremony, and again, Millipore Sigma is funding 2 $1,500 scholarships. So look for more information on that in the coming weeks. Applications will be available at libraries and schools in the area. I do want to say a bit about the partnership with Millipore Sigma and how I really feel it's very relevant this evening. Millipore Sigma has been a kind of a rock in this community for more than 50 years now. And during that time, they have really enhanced their investment in diversity and environmental matters. They pride themselves on the diverse population amongst their workforce, which includes more than 50% women. And they reach the corners of our state and Massachusetts and beyond to bring in a workforce that creates diversity within their walls, and they're very proud of that. Environmentally, Millipore has enhanced and made changes at their site here in Jaffrey, including a wastewater treatment plant that purifies the water that they're using, and also have completely eliminated the use of oil in heating their buildings and are now using a wood burning facility. And all of that has been really important to our local environment as well as our broader planet. So we're very grateful for their efforts there, as well as their work with the Martin Luther King Committee to develop the Student Service Scholarship. So just wanted to say that thank you again to Millipore, and thank you all again. Have a nice evening.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. famously said, "Life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others?" Mindful of this legacy, in 1994, Congress designated the MLK holiday as a national day of service, encouraging people to honor Dr. King by engaging in service to their community. The Jaffrey Ridge MLK Committee strives each year to organize community activities to help realize Dr. King's dream. This year, drawing on our theme of environmental justice, we are directing attention to the ongoing challenge of plastic production and pollution and their disproportionate effects on low-income and minority communities. Please visit the display at the reception to learn more and sign up to take action to reduce single-use plastics to improve health and living conditions and protect our natural environment.
So as we're closing our ceremony, I would like to thank everyone who joined us today to celebrate Martin Luther King, with a very special thank you to those of you who spoke or sang. I'd also like to give a huge thank you to all of our funders, including the Putnam Foundation, the Community Center of Jaffrey, Jaffrey Ridge Rotary Club, and M&T Bank. If it had not been for their generous support and collaboration with our community, we would not have been able to put on this very special program. I would like to invite you all to a reception that will take place in the King's Room upstairs at the Park Theater, immediately following the sing-along of our event. At the reception, there will be an exhibit featuring environmental justice projects by Jackson Ridge 6th graders and other displays, including letters from U.S. Senators Hassan and Shaheen. There will also be refreshments at the reception that were generously donated by some wonderful volunteers. So a huge thank you to everyone who contributed to that. If you are interested in rewatching tonight's program or sharing it with friends and family, the recording will be available at parkyoutube.com as well as on our Facebook page. Once again, I hope you all have a great evening, and I hope to see you at the reception after the sing-along in the King's Room. I will now hand it over to Peggy Vita, who will introduce the sing-along.
I have the privilege of introducing our audience singing by candlelight that traditionally closes our ceremony. It's really been a pleasure to be able to gather with you in person for this special community event. Thank you so much for coming. I wish to thank our Rotary Internet Club student volunteers for their help today. They will now be handing out the candles. We do not have candles for everyone, so please help the volunteers direct them preferentially to the younger people in the audience. And please do not turn on the candles until the song begins. For our closing song this year, we have a special premiere. Seti Hunt was born in Sierra Leone and spent his earliest years in the chaos and trauma of the long and brutal civil war there. Like so many other children, Billy's twin sisters were orphaned. They lived in an orphanage until the war overcame it, and everyone had to flee. Seti and his sister were ultimately adopted together by a New Hampshire family and grew up here in the Granite State. Seti became a composer and a guitarist. After the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, he wrote a new song to express solidarity with the people of our country. Its message of stand together resonates well with our MLK Day theme. Seti could not join us in person today as he now lives in Nashville, Tennessee, but he had a professional music video made and held it to premiere at our ceremony tonight. Can I have a little quiet, please? This is a wonderful message from Seti in his own words. I want to share with you Seti's own words about the moving experience he had in recording this song in Nashville. He wrote, "When we were planning the video, I wanted to be as authentic as possible in spreading the message of unity. My crew and I asked folks off the street of Nashville if they would be willing to hear my song and be filmed in real time, reacting to the message and the music. It was amazing to see how in such a short time, we managed to cross paths with folks visiting from Canada, Turkey, Ukraine, Colombia, Ecuador, New York, North Carolina, and even New Hampshire. The reactions they had to the song are authentic and on the spot. I truly enjoyed this process, as despite all their differences, people really understood the message of hope and unity, and I believe this will fit in well with the MLK presentation. We are proud to present the premiere of Seti Hunt's music video, Stand Together. Lyrics are captioned on the screen so you can follow along. Our program concludes at the conclusion of the song. Please join us at the reception, and please deposit your candles at the doors as you leave. Thank you. Good night.
Bring your hands together, my friends. Wrap your arms around your lovers. We will show this world we're not afraid. Stand together. Bring your hands together, my friends. Wrap your arms around your lovers. We will show this world we're not afraid. We'll stand forever. Show your pain, have no fear. Check your heel. We here. We were all made of miracles, shining through the sky. The world will know our name. even long after we die. Bring your hands together, my friends, wrap your arms around your lovers. We will show this world we're not afraid, we'll stand together. Bring your hands together, my friends, wrap your arms around your lovers. We will show this world we're not afraid, we'll stand forever. So join your way, hold your hands, share your pride, the time is nigh. We'll sing the songs to heal your pain, working towards tomorrow. Our hearts are there to guide us in each and every way. Our hearts are there to guide us in each and every day. Bring your hands together, my friends, wrap your arms around your lovers. We will show this world we're not afraid, we'll stand together. Bring your hands together, my friends, wrap your arms around your lovers. We will show this world we're not afraid, we'll stand forever. So keep your head on the clouds, true love is in our hearts. I know it's hard to do when you're down life. But you're never alone when you're holding close. You're never alone when you're holding close. Bring your hands together, my friends, wrap your arms around your lovers. We will show this world we're not afraid, we'll stand together. Bring your hands together, my friends, wrap your arms around your lovers. We will show this world we're not afraid, we'll stand forever. Bring your hands together, my friends, wrap your arms around your lovers. We will show this world we're not afraid, stand together. Bring your hands together, my friends, wrap your arms around your lovers. We will show this world we're not afraid, stand forever.
Oh, I guess not. I don't think we get to keep these. Do it in, I dare you. I'm so confused.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you, everything going very often tells you things. I know. Everything needs history. I gotta have singing. Yeah. That really, I gotta have.
Yeah.
That's a phenomenal song.
I'm gonna go find this one.
Find the mic, as always.